Watching began to sense something different. The arrogance that once filled the room was starting to lose its hold. A hard-working waitress is humiliated by a powerful businessman in front of everyone. But when a quiet man from the corner table stands up, the entire restaurant learns a lesson about power, justice, and dignity that will change their lives forever. The lunch rush had just begun at the Green Valley restaurant, a place that always buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of conversations. The scent of roasted herbs filled the air, and waiters moved swiftly between tables with trays balanced like art. Among them was Carla, a humble and dedicated waitress who had worked here for nearly 5 years. She was known for her warm smile and graceful patience, the kind that could calm even the most irritable customers. But that afternoon, fate decided to test her in a way she never expected. Carla was serving wine to one of the restaurant's most powerful and feared regulars, Roberto Mendez, a wealthy businessman whose presence commanded attention wherever he went. He sat surrounded by his associates, laughing loudly and boasting about his recent deals. As Carla leaned over to pour a glass, her hand trembled slightly, just enough for a drop of red wine to splash onto his perfectly pressed white shirt. The sound of laughter around the table stopped instantly. The room fell into an uneasy silence that seemed to stretch forever. Roberto looked down at the stain, then slowly raised his eyes toward her, disbelief turning into fury. "What have you done?" he barked, his voice slicing through the air. Carla immediately began apologizing, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, sir, it was an accident. I'll clean it right away." But her apology only fueled his anger. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. The people at nearby tables turned their heads, drawn by the commotion. Roberto towered over Carla, his voice rising with every word. He called her careless, uneducated, and clumsy, accusing her of ruining his image in front of important clients. The harshness in his tone echoed across the restaurant. Carla tried to hold back tears as she dabbed at the stain with a napkin, but Roberto snatched it from her hand and threw it aside. "Do you even know how much this shirt costs?" He sneered. "More than you probably earn in a month." His words hit harder than the spilled wine ever could. The manager, seeing the scene unfold, hesitated at the edge of the room, torn between protecting his employee and keeping a valuable customer happy. No one moved. No one spoke. The clatter of dishes in the kitchen had stopped. Even the air felt heavier. Carla lowered her gaze, her face burning with humiliation. She whispered again, "I'm truly sorry," her voice breaking. But Roberto wasn't done. He continued, raising his voice to make sure everyone could hear. "People like you shouldn't be allowed to serve in places like this. You belong in the streets, not around decent people." His associates laughed nervously, unsure whether to join his cruelty or stay silent. The moment stretched painfully, every second heavier than the last. What no one noticed was the quiet man sitting alone in the corner. Fernando Silva. He had been dining there regularly for months, always polite, always reserved. People knew little about him, except that he tipped generously and never caused trouble. But behind his calm demeanor was a man of deep observation and quiet authority. He watched the scene unfold without emotion, his expression unreadable. Where others saw an embarrassing incident, Fernando saw something else: the imbalance of power, the way fear silenced decency. He noticed how Carla's hands trembled as she tried to maintain composure. He saw how the manager pretended to be busy, unwilling to risk losing a wealthy client. And he saw how Roberto fed on the silence, drawing power from the absence of anyone willing to stand up. Fernando's eyes, sharp and analytical, followed every gesture, every word. He studied Roberto like one studies a pattern, searching for the roots of arrogance that grew from entitlement. Carla's mind, meanwhile, drifted to her little daughter waiting for her at home. She had promised her that one day she would open her own restaurant, that their struggles would mean something. But, standing there, humiliated and small under the weight of a man's cruelty, she felt those dreams slipping further away. Still, she didn't fight back. Not because she was weak, but because she couldn't afford to lose this job. Rent, bills, school fees, they all depended on her keeping her head down and surviving one more day. Roberto finally turned as if to leave. muttering something about incompetent staff and low standards. That was when a deep, steady voice broke through the tension. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," it said. The tone wasn't loud, but it carried effortlessly across the room, stopping everyone mid-motion. Heads turned toward the corner table where Fernando Silva was rising from his seat. He adjusted his jacket calmly and began walking toward them, his footsteps deliberate and unhurried. The crowd parted slightly as he approached, sensing something about his presence that demanded attention without needing to shout. Roberto frowned, surprised that anyone would dare interrupt him. Fernando's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held an unmistakable authority. Quiet, measured but commanding, Carla looked at him, uncertain whether this stranger was coming to defend her or make things worse. But there was something in his gaze, not pity, but principle, the kind of steadiness that promised fairness where chaos had reigned. Fernando stopped beside her, his posture relaxed but confident. He looked briefly at Carla, then turned his eyes toward Roberto. The silence between them felt electric, heavy with unspoken challenge. Everyone in the restaurant waited, breaths held as Fernando's calm voice filled the air once more. "No one deserves to be spoken to like that," he said evenly. "Not here, not anywhere." His words were simple, but the weight of conviction behind them shifted the energy in the room. Carla blinked, startled by the unexpected defense, while Roberto's face darkened in irritation. The power dynamic that had seemed so absolute moments ago was beginning to tilt, and though no one realized it yet, the quiet man from the corner was about to change everything. The restaurant felt suspended in silence after Fernando's calm interruption. His voice hadn't been raised, but it carried a weight that made even the laughter at nearby tables fade into nothing. Roberto turned to face him fully, his brows furrowing as if insulted that someone had dared to challenge his authority. "And who exactly are you to interfere?" he snapped, his tone dripping with superiority. Fernando didn't flinch. His gaze remained steady, his calmness almost unsettling. "Someone who believes decency still has a place in public," he replied softly, but each word landed like a quiet echo of truth. The difference between the two men became instantly clear. One wielded power through arrogance, the other through presence. Roberto's companion shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to support his anger or stay silent. "You have no idea who you're talking to," Roberto said with a bitter laugh. "I could buy and sell men like you before breakfast." Fernando tilted his head slightly, studying him as if assessing a child throwing a tantrum. "That may be," he said, "but it seems your wealth hasn't taught you humility." The calmness in his voice only enraged Roberto further. He stepped closer, his finger jabbing toward Fernando's chest. "Don't lecture me, old man. You think you can walk in here and play hero? You're nobody." The restaurant manager finally decided to intervene, though not in the way anyone hoped. He rushed forward with a forced smile, hands clasped nervously. "Gentlemen, please, let's keep things peaceful," he said, glancing anxiously at Roberto. "Sir, we sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. Carla will, of course, compensate for your shirt." The manager's attempt at diplomacy only deepened the humiliation. Carla's heart sank as she heard her name mentioned like a problem that needed fixing. She stepped forward, clutching her apron tightly. "Sir, I can pay for it," she said quietly. "Not now, but I'll make small payments every week until—" Her voice faltered when Roberto laughed, a cruel, mocking laugh that turned heads. "Pay for it?" he repeated. "You couldn't afford the buttons, sweetheart. Maybe I should make you serve in that filthy uniform until you've earned the price." His friends chuckled uncomfortably, trying to look entertained, but guilt flickered in their eyes. The room seemed to shrink around Carla. The humiliation was suffocating. She tried to step back, but her hands were shaking too much to even hold her tray steady. Before she could speak again, Fernando took a single step forward. "That's enough," he said quietly. It wasn't a shout, but the firmness in his tone silenced the air around them. "You are about to make a very costly mistake." The sentence carried an authority that didn't match his unassuming appearance. The words were not a threat but a promise. Calm, deliberate, and absolute. Roberto blinked in surprise, momentarily thrown off by the confidence radiating from the man who stood before him. "What mistake?" Roberto mocked, though his voice wavered slightly. "Defending someone who can't even pour a glass of wine properly? You're pathetic." Fernando looked at him, his expression unreadable. "The mistake," he said softly, "of believing money can buy dignity, of thinking cruelty makes you powerful." Roberto scoffed, rolling his eyes, but the people Fernando reached into his coat pocket and took out his phone. Calmly, he dialed a number. "Amanda," he said in a tone that carried quiet professionalism, "please contact our legal advisors. I'll need them to prepare documentation regarding a potential incident of workplace harassment and public misconduct." His words made Roberto pause. The restaurant manager's eyes widened slightly, realizing this wasn't just any customer. Fernando continued, "Yes, have them on standby. I'll forward details shortly." Then he hung up, slipping the phone back into his pocket as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Roberto frowned, trying to recover his composure. "Legal advisors?" he scoffed. "Who do you think you are? Some kind of lawyer?" Fernando's gaze met his with steady calm. "You don't need to know who I am," he said, "but you should start wondering what I know." That line lingered in the air like a storm waiting to break. The people around them leaned in unconsciously, drawn by the quiet tension. Roberto's smirk faltered, but he quickly covered it with a laugh. "You're bluffing," he said. "You're nothing." Carla stood there, confused but somehow comforted by Fernando's composure. She watched as he turned to her and spoke with gentle authority. "Write down everything that just happened," he instructed. "The exact words, the time, who witnessed it. Keep that record safe." Carla hesitated, unsure what to do, but his voice carried a certainty that made her obey. "Justice," he added softly, "starts with evidence, not anger." She nodded, holding on to his words like a lifeline. Roberto rolled his eyes. "You're wasting your time," he sneered. "You really think anyone cares about her little sob story? I have people in every office in this city. You don't scare me." Fernando smiled faintly, almost pitying him. "I don't intend to scare you," he said. "I simply believe truth has a way of finding its own audience." His calmness was beginning to irritate Roberto more than any insult could. Fernando's phone buzzed, and he checked it briefly, nodding once before tucking it away. "Thank you, Amanda," he murmured quietly, though the other man couldn't hear what was said. There was something in his demeanor, the control, the certainty, that unsettled everyone. The balance of power had shifted, and even those watching could sense it. Roberto's arrogance wavered for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. Still, he tried to recover with another laugh. "This is ridiculous," he said loudly, looking around at the onlookers as if seeking validation. "I don't know who this clown thinks he is." But the confidence in his voice was gone. Fernando didn't respond. He simply looked at Roberto, not with anger, but with the kind of patience that comes from knowing how a story ends before anyone else does. Behind that calm gaze, Fernando already knew the truth about Roberto. The corruption, the forged documents, the employees he'd underpaid, the projects that had quietly collapsed under his name. He knew every detail, every secret that could undo the man's empire in a single day. But for now, he said nothing. He simply stood there in that silent restaurant, watching as the powerful man before him crumbled without even realizing it yet. The storm was coming, and it had already chosen its target. The tension inside the restaurant was thick enough to silence even the smallest whisper. Every eye was fixed on the quiet man who had just called his legal team, and every thought hung suspended between curiosity and disbelief. A few minutes later, the soft sound of high heels echoed across the marble floor. Amanda entered the restaurant, poised and professional, followed by two assistants carrying briefcases. She moved with purpose, her presence commanding the kind of attention that only those who belong to power can command. She approached Fernando with a nod, placing a folder neatly on the nearest table. "Everything you requested, sir," she said, her tone calm but formal. The single word "sir" sent a ripple through the room. Roberto's smirk faltered. He turned toward Fernando, his brows knitting in confusion. "Sir?" he repeated, as if the word didn't belong in this context. The quiet man from the corner suddenly seemed less like an ordinary customer and more like someone the world should have known. Fernando adjusted his cufflinks, unhurried and deliberate, before finally meeting Roberto's bewildered gaze. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," he said in that same calm voice that had carried through the chaos earlier. "My name is Fernando Silva, CEO of Silva Holdings." The silence that followed was deafening. A stunned murmur spread through the restaurant. Even the manager froze in disbelief. Silva Holdings wasn't just another company. It was a corporate powerhouse known for acquiring and reforming failing businesses, and for exposing corruption at the highest levels. Fernando's reputation in the business world was legendary. A man both feared and respected for his integrity. Roberto's face drained of color. His arrogance, once towering, crumbled into visible panic. "This can't be real," he muttered under his breath. Fernando turned to Amanda. "Please proceed," he said. Amanda opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents and a tablet. She connected it to a small portable screen from her assistant's case. The restaurant's lively chatter had vanished entirely. Everyone, staff, diners, even Roberto's friends, stood in tense anticipation. Amanda's tone was crisp as she began. "Mr. Silva has been observing the operations of this establishment for several months. During this review, several irregularities were discovered, all linked to Mr. Roberto Mendez." Roberto stiffened. "Irregularities?" he snapped. "What kind of nonsense is this?" But Amanda continued, unbothered by his interruption. "Evidence includes falsified financial reports, unpaid staff wages, and intimidation of employees who attempted to file complaints. Furthermore, several contracts related to your construction projects show signs of tampering and insider trading." She placed each document before him, the weight of truth landing one page at a time. Fernando watched silently as Roberto's bravado collapsed. Every new revelation stripped another layer from the facade he had built. Amanda swiped across the tablet and videos began to play. Hidden camera footage showing Roberto berating kitchen staff, mocking minority employees, and coercing junior managers into unethical decisions. Gasps filled the room as familiar faces appeared on the screen. People who had once feared him now saw their pain validated, broadcast for all to witness. Roberto stumbled backward, his hand gripping the edge of a table as if for balance. "You can't do this," he stammered. "This is defamation." Fernando finally spoke, his voice steady and precise. "Defamation is falsehood spoken as truth," he said. "What you see here is the truth you tried to bury." His eyes met Roberto's, not with rage, but with quiet disappointment. "You've spent years convincing people you were untouchable. But power built on fear never lasts." Amanda placed the final document on the table. A letter signed by multiple legal representatives confirming Silva Holdings' intent to acquire Green Valley Restaurant, pending resolution of ethical concerns. "You see," Fernando continued, "we had already begun negotiations to purchase this establishment. I wanted to understand the environment here, the culture, the people, the leadership, and today you have provided me with all the evidence I needed to make a decision." The crowd stood frozen as the reality settled in. Roberto, once the most dominant figure in the room, now looked small, cornered not by threats but by facts. His voice cracked as he spoke. "You planned this. You set me up?" Fernando shook his head. "No, Roberto. You set yourself up. I simply gave you the space to reveal who you really are." Carla stood quietly near the counter, her heart pounding. She could hardly believe what was unfolding before her eyes. Only an hour ago she had been a target of humiliation. Now her tormentor stood publicly stripped of pride. Fernando turned toward her, his expression softening for the first time that evening. "Carla," he said gently, "you didn't deserve what happened today. No one does. You showed restraint when you could have fought back, and that kind of strength is rare." She blinked, unable to respond, her eyes welling with tears. Then Fernando did something that left everyone speechless. He turned to Amanda and said, "Prepare a new contract for Miss Carla. She's to be offered a management position in the new structure. Roberto's head snapped up, his mouth falling open. "You're giving her my position?" he shouted. Fernando met his outburst with cool indifference. "No," he replied. "I'm giving her an opportunity, something you never learned to give others." The onlookers began whispering, their sympathy now firmly with Carla. Some even clapped softly, though Fernando lifted a hand, signaling for silence. "This isn't about vengeance," he said. "It's about balance. Every action has its return. You sowed arrogance and cruelty. Today, you reap their consequence." His words carried no hatred, only truth. Roberto slumped into a chair, the weight of his downfall pressing onto his shoulders. He muttered something about calling his lawyers, but Amanda had already handed him a notice of immediate suspension from all managerial duties. "Silva Holdings will handle all legal communications from this point onward," she informed him with professional finality. As Fernando prepared to leave, he paused beside Carla. "Use this moment," he said quietly, "not to remember the pain, but to prove that dignity always has value." She nodded, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Thank you, sir." He smiled faintly. "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank yourself for standing tall." When he walked out of the restaurant, the crowd remained silent, not daring to move. Roberto sat in shock, his empire crumbling in full view of the people he had once belittled, and in that silence something profound shifted. Power had changed hands, not through violence, but through truth, revealed with the elegance of justice itself. The next morning, the world around Green Valley Restaurant felt different. The air itself seemed lighter, as if the place had been cleansed of a long-standing shadow. Inside, staff whispered among themselves, trying to absorb what had happened the night before. The once untouchable Roberto Mendez had been publicly exposed and stripped of authority. Yet the true surprise came not from his fall, but from the unexpected rise that followed. Fernando Silva had returned early that morning, not as a customer, but as the new owner. When he gathered everyone in the dining hall, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Fernando stood at the center, composed and dignified. Amanda was beside him, holding a folder with the company's official documents. "As of today," Fernando began, "Silva Holdings has officially completed the acquisition of Green Valley Restaurant." A collective gasp spread through the staff. Roberto, who had stormed into the room moments earlier demanding explanations, froze. His voice was sharp when he spoke. "You can't do that. This place is mine." Fernando looked at him calmly, the same quiet authority in his eyes as before. "Not anymore," he replied. "We acquired the restaurant's debt from the bank 3 weeks ago. You may have owned its name, Roberto, but the foundation beneath it was already gone." Amanda opened the folder and handed Roberto the documents confirming the purchase. His face went pale as he scanned the pages. "This can't be legal," he muttered, his voice trembling. Amanda's tone remained polite but firm. "It's perfectly legal, Mr. Mendez. You signed a refinancing agreement last year using the restaurant as collateral. Silva Holdings acquired that debt, meaning we now own the property, assets, and brand rights." The room was silent, every word echoing like a verdict. Fernando turned his gaze to Roberto. "We didn't plan to humiliate you," he said quietly. "Only to bring justice. The humiliation was your own doing." The words struck deeper than any insult. Roberto's shoulders slumped, the reality of his collapse sinking in. But Fernando wasn't finished. He nodded toward Amanda, who pulled out another file. "Unfortunately," she said, "we also uncovered additional financial activity linked to your accounts, including gambling debts and unreported transactions that constitute embezzlement." She placed the evidence before him like a final judgment. Roberto stared at the papers, his hands shaking. He had built an empire on pride and deceit, and now it was unraveling, thread by thread. Within days, the news spread across the city. Roberto's reputation disintegrated in headlines that spoke of scandal, debt, and betrayal. His father, a respected businessman, released a public statement disowning any connection to his son's dealings. Investors withdrew, clients disappeared, and his once bustling company crumbled almost overnight. Those who had once laughed at his jokes now avoided his name altogether. Power, it turned out, had never truly belonged to him. It was borrowed, and it had finally been reclaimed. 6 months later, the Green Valley restaurant was unrecognizable. The walls had been repainted in warm earth tones, the lighting softer, the energy brighter. A new sign hung above the entrance: the Green Valley Community Restaurant and Training Center. It wasn't just a place to eat anymore, it was a space for opportunity. Under Silva Holdings management, it had become a program that trained young people in hospitality, management, and leadership. Every week, new faces arrived. Students, single parents, and dreamers like Carla once was, all finding a place to rebuild their lives. Carla had blossomed in her new role as managing partner, holding a 35% share in the business. She worked tirelessly, not out of fear anymore, but out of passion. The staff respected her deeply, not because of her title, but because of the journey she'd lived through. Her voice carried warmth and confidence now. Her daughter, Isabella, often came after school, doing homework at a corner table while watching her mother lead with quiet grace. The sight filled Carla with pride. Every shift, every hardship, every tear had led to this. Fernando visited often, though never to take credit. He preferred to observe from a distance, his satisfaction coming from seeing others rise. On one sunny afternoon, he arrived unannounced, greeting Carla with his familiar calm smile. The restaurant was full, laughter spilling from every table. "You've built something remarkable," he said, looking around. "It's not mine," she replied with a soft smile. "It's ours, the team, the people, the community." Fernando nodded approvingly. "That's what leadership truly is," he said. "Not control, but empowerment." They walked through the kitchen, now staffed with trainees from nearby neighborhoods. Carla explained how they were expanding, teaching young people not only to cook and serve, but also to manage finances and pursue their own ventures. "It's amazing," Fernando said. "You turned pain into purpose." Carla looked down, her voice thoughtful. "I used to think justice meant watching someone fall," she said. "But now I know it means helping others rise." As evening settled, Fernando prepared to leave. He turned one last time at the door, watching Carla laugh with her staff, her daughter running into her arms. There was no trace of the timid waitress who once stood trembling before cruelty, only a woman who had learned to turn humiliation into hope. Somewhere across town, Roberto sat behind a small desk at a car dealership. His days were quiet now, spent selling vehicles he could no longer afford to drive. He avoided mirrors. The reflection of who he once was had become too painful to face. There were moments when he caught news about the restaurant, about Carla's success, about Fernando's philanthropy. Each headline reminded him of the truth, that arrogance had blinded him to everything that truly mattered. Back at Green Valley, as the lights dimmed and the final customers left, Carla stood by the window, looking out at the city that had once seemed so cruel. She felt no anger, no bitterness, only peace. She knew that justice hadn't come through revenge, but through transformation. It had come through growth, integrity, and the courage to begin again. She smiled faintly, whispering to herself, "The best revenge isn't to destroy someone. It's to build something so great that they become irrelevant." And with that, she turned off the lights, leaving behind a legacy that glowed far brighter than any victory born of vengeance.